So actually, let's go back one shloka. Go to 40. Probably. Where did I go? Let's do 40 for just a second. So last week, this was the shloka that we ended in. Indriyani mano buddhir asya dishtana uchyate etai vimohayatyesha jnanamavritya dehinam. Translation of the shloka is: the senses, mind, and intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. And I think I forgot to record.
Recording in progress.
So the translation of shloka 3.40 was: the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So Lord Krishna has used the word lust. Now, the word lust has a positive connotation and a negative connotation. Let's first understand what is the positive connotation of the word kama. In the context of the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas, which is primarily for those who are in pursuit of material desires, they can certainly attain those material desires, but by following the scriptures. So that segment of the scriptures that one has to follow to satisfy their kama is called the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. And it is constructed in the format of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, which means before you can even earn a living, you must first understand what is there in the Shastras. So the first few years of your life, when you enter Gurukul, you must first understand the do's and don'ts of the scriptures. After you've had a good understanding, you don't need to be an expert, but after you've had a good understanding, through knowledge, you develop the discerning capability. Based on that discerning capability, you are then authorized to earn a living, which is the next stage. Which means earning your living must be based on dharmic principles only. So, of course, that means that if you earn a living, you're earning a living for a reason. You have certain desires that you want to fulfill. And in that context, the word kama has a positive connotation. You have to take care of your family. You have to put a roof over your family's head. You have to put food on the table. You have to ensure that they have a relatively comfortable life. So in that pursuit, kama is authorized by the scriptures, just so that you can maintain your body. So in that context, kama has a positive connotation. But here in this chapter 3, based on the question that Arjuna asks, why is it that sometimes we feel compelled to do things that otherwise we know is the wrong thing to do? That was Arjuna's question. Essentially, his question was, why are human beings self-destructive? Why are we sometimes self-destructive? In response to that question, Krishna uses the word kama. And here, the word kama attains a negative connotation. You may think that there is not there is a subtle difference between desire and lust. So to Ajit Prabhu's question that he had posted last week. So how does one define karma in this negative context? So karma includes any and all selfish, self-destructive desire. And those desire can be influenced by any one of the three modes. That does not make that lust any easier to overcome. And I can just take a mundane example here. A mundane example could be, one wants to lose weight. And initially you're committed to losing that weight. And you have set a target for yourself. And initially you lose weight. But the last few kilos, it's very difficult to lose. Similarly, if you take the analogy of an athlete, right? Running a 100-meter race or whatever, 400-meter race. It's that you're pushing yourself so hard that the last mile is the toughest, they say. Because the end is so close, you can see it. But somehow or the other, you tend to encounter more difficulties then. So even it is a quote unquote good desire, it doesn't mean it is an easy thing to accomplish. Of course, the examples that I was giving is not necessarily self-destructive. I'll come to self-destructive karma in a minute. So this is the context with which Krishna is responding to Arjuna's question, which is, why are we self-destructive? And in response to that question, Krishna uses the word karma. So let's finish the 3 shlokas and then we will come back to the analogy of hardware, software, and the user. Where is the problem? And then practically, how do we tackle this particular problem? That's what we're going to look at. So shloka 3.41. Tasmat tvam indriyan yadav.
Tasmat tvam indriyanyadav.
Niyamya bharatarshabha.
Niyamya bharatarshabha.
Papmanam prajahihyenam.
Papmanam prajahihyenam.
Jnana vijnana nashanam.
Jnana vijnana nashanam.
Tasmat tvam indriyan yadav.
Tasmat tvam indriyanyadav.
Niyamya bharatarshabha.
Niyamya bharatarshabha.
Papmanam prajahihyenam.
Papmanam prajahihyenam.
Jnana vijnana nashanam.
Jnana vijnana nashanam.
Tasmat tvam indriyan yadav.
Tasmat tvam indriyanyadav.
Niyamya bharatarshabha.
Niyamya bharatarshabha.
Papmanam prajahihyenam.
Papmanam prajahihyenam.
Jnana vijnana nashanam.
Jnana vijnana nashanam.
Translation. Therefore, O Arjuna,
Therefore, O Arjuna,
best of the Bharatas,
best of the Bharatas,
in the very beginning,
in the very beginning,
curb this great symbol of sin,
curb this great symbol of sin,
lust,
by
regulating the senses,
the senses,
and slay this destroyer of knowledge,
and slay this destroyer of knowledge
and self-realization.
and self-realization.
Interestingly, Lord Krishna uses warfare analogy. He uses the word slay, this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. So Krishna is using very strong language to indicate whether that lust is in the mode of goodness, or it's in the mode of passion, or it is in the mode of ignorance. It is still sinful. And the only way one can destroy it is through knowledge and self-realization, but we'll walk through some practical examples of how that is actually done. So Krishna is clearly indicating that it is not difficult to overcome this lust, even if it is in the mode of goodness. Even though there are degrees of lust, that does not imply that that particular individual is going to find it easy to overcome. It depends on the person who's dealing with that particular problem. First of all, it begins with awareness. If you don't think you have a problem, you'll never address it. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. Jnana refers to knowledge of self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnana refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Soul. It is explained thus in Srimad Bhagavatam. Jnanam parama guhyam me yad vijnana samanvitam sarahasyam tadangam cha grihana gaditam maya. The knowledge of the self and the Supreme Self is very confidential and mysterious. But such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord Himself. Bhagavad Gita gives us that general and specific knowledge of the self. The living entities are parts and parcels of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna Consciousness. So from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna Consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna conscious and act accordingly. Lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. So Krishna is saying that the only way we can overcome these lustful tendencies that are influenced by the three gunas is to begin with regulating the senses. And one can learn how to regulate the senses if one comes into contact with knowledge. The first confidential aspect is that there is a difference between the body and the soul. And everything that you do really should benefit the soul more than it should benefit the body. So the question for us is, when do we come to the realization that everything that we're doing today is actually benefiting the body and may or may not necessarily benefit the soul? So because we are operating with incomplete knowledge, Krishna is saying, if you understood all of what you need to know, which is first of all that there is a difference between the body and the soul. Second, your constitutional position is to serve the Lord. If you understand these three, as a matter of fact, Krishna says this is knowledge, right? In chapter 15. Understanding there is a soul, the super soul, and what is the duty of the soul, and understanding that this soul is operating the body. Then you have started down this path of beginning to apply this knowledge to control your senses. Then, of course, once you begin to regulate the senses, you should also try and influence the mind and intelligence. Then Krishna says, you can slay this lust. Indriyani paranyahur.
Indriyani paranyahur.
Indriyebhyah param manah.
Indriyebhyah param manah.
Manasastu para buddhir.
Manasastu para buddhir.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Indriyani paranyahur.
Indriyani paranyahur.
Indriyebhyah param manah.
Indriyebhyah param manah.
Manasastu para buddhir.
Manasastu para buddhir.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Indriyani paranyahur.
Indriyani paranyahur.
Indriyebhyah param manah.
Indriyebhyah param manah.
Manasastu para buddhir.
Manasastu para buddhir.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha.
Translation. The working senses
The working senses
are superior to dull matter.
are superior to dull matter.
Mind is higher than the senses.
Mind is higher than the senses.
Intelligence is still higher than the mind.
Intelligence is still higher than the mind.
And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence.
And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence.
So Lord Krishna is now just walking quickly through the ladder of priority. Like, this is where matter is, this is where senses are, then, mind is here, and then intelligence is there. And above intelligence is the soul. So, which means we now need to influence the senses, we need to regulate the senses, we need to regulate the mind, we need to regulate the intelligence. By doing that, we are influencing the consciousness. To Ami Mataji's question last week, what is the difference between consciousness and the soul? There is no difference. Just like one cannot separate sunlight, the light and heat from the sun, one cannot separate consciousness from the soul. The symptom of the soul is consciousness. So, in a way, they can be used interchangeably. Except for the fact that the Shastras repeatedly say, and Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, that the soul is eternally pure. No matter what happens, the soul by itself does not get contaminated. But it is the symptom of the soul when it simply comes in contact with Maya Devi that it begins to experience this covering of contamination, this loss of what is actually really important. So one cannot separate consciousness from the soul. They are not two separate things. But the senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but it is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions as described here ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If therefore the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Param drishtva nivartate. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem, which is what Krishna has anyway said in the previous shloka, that we must use knowledge to come to the proper understanding on how to regulate the senses. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong like serpents, they will be no more effective than the serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there's every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So, Prabhupada uses this analogy of this iron rod being placed in the fire. Over a period of time, you cannot distinguish between the iron rod and the fire because the iron rod has acquired the qualities of fire. But the minute you separate the iron rod from the fire, the cooling process begins. So the risk for us is that the minute we stop association with Krishna, with devotees of Krishna, with chanting, with reading the Bhagavad Gita, the minute we stop or we think, I'll get back to it in a couple of weeks, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. You know, rookie devotees make one mistake, and every devotee will experience this. What they think is, when they first come to Krishna consciousness, they are so attracted by Krishna consciousness that they want to do more and more and more in Krishna consciousness. They suddenly recognize the importance of this bhakti yoga. But because they are compelled by so many other duties and responsibilities, the rookie mistake that is made by devotees is they think that this is what I'll do. I want to practice Krishna consciousness. I want to devote more time and attention to it. Right now, I have a job. I have other responsibilities. Let me quickly earn whatever money I need to earn in the next 5 years. I will reduce my desires. I will put Krishna consciousness on hold. I will come back in 5 years' time. I'll come back in 10 years' time. This is what neophyte devotees will think. They are sold. Krishna consciousness, you don't have to convince them anymore. They are sold, they have faith. But they don't understand the dangers of moving away from it even for a second. Or maybe second is too much. Even for a day. Maybe a day is too much. Even for a week without devotee association. The risk is so immense because as practitioners, we have not learned how to control our mind. We have not learned how to regulate our mind. If acharyas like Srila Prabhupada, who are self-realized souls, were still chanting every day, they were still reading Bhagavatam every day, they were still listening to Krishna Katha every day. That is because even self-realized souls understand that the minute they separate from Krishna, finished. There are actually devotees in ISKCON who have made this mistake, who have convinced senior devotees they will definitely come back. They're going to focus all their attention on putting certain amount of money in the bank. They can retire from work early. They will come back to Krishna consciousness. What is the problem here? What's the problem here?
Mataji, once they are into that state of mind where Krishna is not in their life, so this lust takes over, and then the several branches of lust, desires, and endless sense gratification, vicious cycle gets started, and then they are no longer come back.
Yeah.
They have lost time, Mataji.
They have lost time.
Once they move away spiritually, there is more exposure to material nature. And I think
Yes.
that's where everything goes downhill from there.
Yes. Because you're only exposed to the material aspect of things, you lost touch with Krishna consciousness, thinking naively that you're strong enough to pull yourself back. That is how powerful lust is. And so this was also in the context of Arjuna's question. Because we don't have sufficient knowledge and we tend to make decisions without understanding the machinations of how this works, we end up making rookie mistakes like this. So even when you're practicing Krishna consciousness, you will think, I'm strong enough, I'm sold on Krishna, don't worry, I will come back. Chances of that happening is slim to none. But how can you come back to Krishna consciousness again? In such a circumstance. How will you come back to Krishna consciousness?
Mataji, one way would be by associating with the devotees.
Yes, again.
Maybe our good karmas somehow will help us to come out to this path, Mataji.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Somehow our good karmas, maybe God will give us a chance to come out. This has happened with me. This is a very good example. Like when I was small, I used to visit ISKCON temple, but due to something last 20 years, I was not in touch with ISKCON temple and everything. Then somehow God gave me chance.
Yes. If you have received the Lord's mercy, then yes, you can come back. But of your own endeavor, very hard. So the essence of practicing Krishna consciousness is to understand that you are not in control. So unless you surrender to the Lord and stay in contact with devotees, very hard. Very hard. I know there are plenty of people on this call who are attending today's class who can vouch for that. If you don't attend a couple of classes, what happens in that day? I'm sure most of you can share your experiences. 2 weeks you miss class, before you know it, you have missed 2 months. And before you know it, you've stopped chanting. Before you know it, you've gone back to your old habits. It's that quick. The deterioration can be that quick. It is actually very frightening. That is the one fear that devotees live with. Lord, please let me not succumb to any temptation that is out there. Please, whatever happens, let me stay with the devotees. Whatever happens, please don't put any temptations in my path that I am going to succumb to. Whatever those temptations may be, for example, I'm not talking about me. If a devotee says, I'm going through a divorce, I just don't have time now. I will chant my round. Once I've settled the case, I'll come back. Very difficult to do that. I've got exams as a student. Definitely you need to focus on preparing for your exams. But trust me, those 2-3 weeks of exams, no? The chances of you coming back is slim to none. You know when you will come back? If I drop you a message saying, where have you been? There may be a chance. Out of guilt, you may come back because Mataji is following up. This has happened. I know that. I interact with a lot of you on WhatsApp. So some of you come consistently, then there is a gap, then I will follow up with you, then you'll come back. This is how easy it is to lose this precious gift that you have gotten, although you didn't deserve it. So this is how precious this Krishna consciousness is. If we don't value it, it's gone. And if we don't understand how you keep that iron in that fire and how you have to maintain that iron in that fire, then the cooling process begins immediately. The temperature changes immediately. Last shloka in this chapter. Evam buddhe param buddhva.
Evam buddhe param buddhva.
Samstabhyatmanamatmana.
Samstabhyatmanamatmana.
Jahi shatrum mahabaho.
Jahi shatrum mahabaho.
Kamarupam durasadam.
Kamarupam durasadam.
Evam buddhe param buddhva.
Evam buddhe param buddhva.
Samstabhyatmanamatmana.
Samstabhyatmanamatmana.
Jahi shatrum mahabaho.
Jahi shatrum mahabaho.
Kamarupam durasadam.
Kamarupam durasadam.
Evam buddhe param buddhva.
Evam buddhe param buddhva.
Samstabhyatmanamatmana.
Samstabhyatmanamatmana.
Jahi shatrum mahabaho.
Jahi shatrum mahabaho.
Kamarupam durasadam.
Kamarupam durasadam.
Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental
Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental
to the material senses,
to the material senses,
mind and intelligence,
mind and intelligence,
O mighty armed Arjuna,
O mighty armed Arjuna,
one should study the mind
one should study the mind
by deliberate spiritual intelligence,
by deliberate spiritual intelligence,
and thus by spiritual strength
and thus by spiritual strength
conquer this insatiable enemy
conquer this insatiable enemy
known as lust.
known as lust.
So Krishna uses the word dhurasadam, formidable, telling us clearly this is not an enemy we should take lightly. Again, a war analogy, conquer and then enemy, insatiable enemy. Purport. This third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead without considering impersonal voidness, the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire, for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed toward one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the third chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of Karma Yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. So I was listening to the lecture of His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, and he's used some fantastic analogies and walked through examples to tell you how this actually works and why is Krishna calling this enemy. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu actually says that this is the crux of this chapter, which is Shloka 36. So let us go to Shloka 36. So here, Arjuna Uvacha Atakkena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha anichannapi varshneya baladivaniyojitāh. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Right. So, so there are three questions here, underlying questions here. The first question is, why do I sometimes sabotage myself? The second element is, do I have inner demons? And if the answer is yes, how can I slay them? So three questions. Why do I sometimes sabotage myself? Do I have inner demons? And how can I slay them? And Prabhu was using the following analogy. A mouse is very attracted to cheese. An easy way to trap a mouse is to place cheese in the mouse trap. Now, for the mouse, the cheese is natural food. But it does not know that this cheese is residing within that trap. But now let's come to a human being and let's look at the problem of addiction. So humans, whether it is cigarettes or alcohol or drugs, we have the intelligence to know that it is not our food. And we also have the intelligence to know that those objects harm us. So the next question is, why do we still do it? The mouse is selfless. It is natural food. It doesn't know the trap is a trap. But the human being has sufficient intelligence to understand that there are certain objects that look very attractive. It is not food. The human being knows, unless you're a very young child and fed alcohol and take to cigarettes. So the question is, why is a human being compelled to do things that seem to be self-destructive? So we've used the example of addiction, and we'll use the example of addiction now. But the same can be talked about any one of our anarthas. It could be anger, it could be greed, it could be envy, it could be the need for praise, it could be the need for constant recognition from others. It could be the need for your guru to tell you you're the greatest devotee, disciple. So these desires or this lust become more and more and more subtle. It is not that if the lust is subtle, it is easier to tackle. Actually, it is much harder to tackle because one, it is not visible to others. You are very good at camouflaging it. Very good. So let's say I am doing X number of Gita Sandesh classes in a year, somehow or the other, I want that message to go to my Gurudev. I am not in the right mode of service at all. Will I ever express this kind of desire to the temple president or anybody? Nobody I will express. But in my heart, I am hoping and praying my Guru will recognize me. My Guru will tell me what a great job I'm doing. So this kind of very subtle desire, these are subtle desires, right? It doesn't leave you. You may get agitated when the outcome doesn't come. In this case, you're acting to do more classes. You are putting out more data about yourself. How many people are attending? How many people praised you? How many people gave you fantastic feedback? How many people said there's nobody like you, Navadip Mataji? This is on a subtle platform. You are not visibly stating to anybody, take a look at me, how great I am. But nevertheless, the intent is there. The desire is very strong to be recognized. So even on the spiritual path, we have to be extremely cautious about falling victim to such kind of subtle desires. When you have desires like this, you will lose sight of what is actually important in Krishna consciousness, which is actually service. Service without recognition. We should presuppose that recognition will never come. And it doesn't matter whether it comes or doesn't come. That should be the mood of a disciple. You may think, oh, that's in the Shuddha Sattva platform, What's wrong? I'm conducting Bhagavad Gita classes. I'm asking for feedback. What's wrong if I share it? So this is also lust. But it works at a very subtle level. So coming back to this addiction problem, Prabhu was using an example of Mike Tyson fighting Evander Holyfield, I believe, in a boxing match. And there was one ghastly incident where Mike Tyson, out of anger during the fight, bites off a portion of Evander Holyfield's ear. After that, when Mike Tyson was interviewed, he said, I am fighting my inner demons. In the sense, he didn't know why he did it. He couldn't control himself. It's not that he was not an intelligent man. He's a very intelligent man. If you've ever heard Mike Tyson in interviews, he's not a dumb person by any stretch of the imagination. Why did he do that? He was impelled by something that he could not control. So sometimes we think that we are very gentle creatures, no? Most of the time we're peaceful, we're loving. But some incident happens, and specifically with family members, you lose control. And you have an outburst. And during that outburst, you become unrecognizable to yourself. Sometimes you're like, where did that come from? Why did I behave that way? Why did I raise my voice? Otherwise, I'm generally in cool, calm personality. How many of you had this problem? How many of you think that you're cool, calm, but situations arise when you completely lose control. I have done that. How many people have lost control although you really didn't want to? You didn't intend to, that was not your goal, was not your objective, but you lost control of the situation. What caused you to lose that control? So, so the question is, does that mean you're possessed by a demon? Is that why you lost control? No. So Prabhu was explaining, this demon is not a literal demon, it is a figurative demon. And what is this demon? This demon is actually a collection of impressions over a period of time. A collection of impressions over a period of time. And that is the degrading force that causes you to act even though you didn't want to conduct yourself that way. Because you don't like yourself when you get angry. You wonder why you did what you did. So we'll talk about impressions, and Prabhuji was using the concept as follows. So he talked about how the Bhagavad Gita offers us a broad model of ourself, which is, one is the hardware in the form of the body, then there is the mind, which acts as the software, and then the user of this hardware and software, which is the soul. So I had mentioned earlier that we have a software problem, not a hardware problem. Hardware we cannot do anything about. You've got the body that you've got. So software implies programming, correct? Coding, programming. So Prabhuji was using a wonderful analogy. He says, let us say, for example, you are always on Google, and we all know how Google and other websites keep track of your search history. And before you know it, Google is predicting what is it that that you're searching for. You type the first alphabet and it seems to think it knows what you actually are looking for. So Prabhuji was using the example of, let's say you used to visit a movie site for Bollywood movies. There is a history of impressions there of you typing and searching for Bollywood movies. Somehow or the other, you've come into contact with ISKCON. You've started attending Bhagavad Gita classes. And the first time you go to Google and just type the alphabet B, what will you get as the first drop-down option?
Bhagavad Gita.
Arey, how? You've never searched for Bhagavad Gita before. The minute you type B, it will come, the first drop-down option will be Bollywood, because that's what Google remembers. Right? So this is the process of auto-completion in the mind. You know, you have conducted yourself in a certain manner in a given situation. That impression is already there. Next time you encounter that same situation, the same conduct happens. It's just autocomplete. So Prabhu was saying about, let's say, an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, he's trying to avoid alcohol. And he visits the mall to buy some groceries or buy some shirt or something. But he happens to cross a bar. Immediately the mind will propose, why don't you go to the bar? Just this once. And if this person does not have sufficient self-control, then impulsively that person will act immediately. On just the thought occurring in that mind will be enough for him to go sit at the bar and have a drink. When that impulse triggers, there is no room for introspection. Zero introspection. You are just reacting to the situation. So hence in anger management classes, they tell you, you have to put yourself at a distance from the problem. So when you encounter a situation, they tell you, right, take a deep breath 3 times or count to 10. Or if you can't do that, just walk out. Go for a walk. Cool yourself down. Don't react to the situation because you need time to introspect because the mind is in autocomplete mode. It is saying react to the situation. So the sequence of the activities is as follows. The body acts out based on its desires of the mind, which is sanctioned by intelligence. The intelligence says yes, no. Over a period of time, through all of these activities, it creates impressions in the mind. Then, because these impressions are there, the next time you encounter similar situations, propositions come up. The proposition to act in the same way comes up, and it is so quick, you really don't recognize it. Right? And what happens? You repeat, and before you know it, it becomes an addiction. Whatever that addiction is, anger, the need for praise, the need for fame, the need for honor, whatever it is, whatever that it is an addiction. So then the next question is, so we acknowledge that we have this demon within us, and the demon is actually residing in the form of impressions in the mind. So the next question is, how do you how do you slay them? So using the word slay, because Krishna is using the word slay, a warfare term here, to kill it. And the Shastras say there are actually 6 demons: lust, anger, greed, envy, pride, and illusion. But Krishna predominantly focuses on lust, anger, and greed. So in chapter 16, Krishna calls this lust, anger, and greed as the 3 gates to hell. And he further uses the words that these 3 gates to hell, if we are not aware of it, they will destroy the soul, is what Krishna says. Destroy the soul. Of course, we know that the soul is eternal and cannot be destroyed. But what Krishna means here is that this is self-destructive. If we don't watch out and avoid these 3 gates to hell, lust, anger, and greed, that will lead to self-destruction. Now, self-destruction, there are degrees of self-destruction, right? Some self-destruction is not visible to others, but internally you are not a very happy person. Some self-destructive tendencies is visible in the form of alcohol addiction or drug addiction or porn addiction. Some of this may be visible. Some of the addictions only you know. It may not necessarily be obvious and visible to all. So, so these impressions in the mind is equivalent to you can equate it to like these preferences in Google, right? These various websites remember your past history, search history. And they are instinctively recommending you to do this or that. So when you type B, you'll get Bollywood and not Bhagavad Gita. So you'll have to keep typing Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita, so that Google learns that next time you type B, the first option may be Bhagavad Gita and not Bollywood. Which means you have to change the impressions to avoid or slay. I should not say avoid, because Krishna clearly says slay the enemy. He doesn't say avoid it, which means we need to confront it and slay it. So Krishna is saying, tackle these three enemies, lust, anger, and greed. If you don't tackle these three enemies, it will consume you. Right? So these internal impressions is actually what overpowers us. But different people need different levels of assistance to overcome these kind of impressions. Some of these impressions are subtle, some of these impressions are very obvious, etc. So then, in the realm of addiction, there is this concept of, is addiction a defect or is it a disease? Is addiction a defect or is it a disease? Is it a defect or a disease?
I think it is Mataji.
It is a?
It's a disease.
Defect.
It's a
It's a
defect.
disease.
A disease.
I feel it's a disease.
Disease.
Correct?
Disease because it can be cured.
Disease because it can be cured. Defect cannot be cured. Defect cannot be modified.
No, I don't think so. Don't know, Mataji.
Okay. Anybody else?
It's
Defect and disease.
it's a defect because it is internal.
Defect because it is internal. Okay. A defect implies that it can be addressed. For example, sometimes, if family members are dealing with another family member with an addiction problem, they may make certain statements that are very harsh. One of the statements that they will make is, you don't have the willpower. If you have the willpower, you can overcome this defect. So it suggests that it is willpower alone that is preventing this person from coming out of that addiction. So defect implies, as Prabhuji rightly said, that it is an internal problem that can be fixed, that can be corrected. Then what does disease imply then? If we understood that defect is something that you can fix, what does disease imply in the context of addiction?
Can be treated. It can be treated.
Mataji, I think maybe something which requires external intervention. Isn't that how we usually treat a disease? So.
Yes, that it's a product of nature. Something that is much more difficult to address. But for any and all kinds of addictions, it begins as a defect, and if it is not addressed, it could end up being a disease that is completely out of control. Actually, Prabhuji was also using another analogy that I talked about in the morning class. All of this is an infection, right? Lust impelled by Sattva-guna is an infection. Lust impelled by Raja-guna is an infection. Lust impelled by Tamo-guna is also an infection. The severity may be different. So you could say that lust, desires, anger, greed, lust specifically, under the influence of sattva gun, you could say it's a mild infection. And let's say under the influence of rajagun, it is a severe infection. And lust under the influence of the tamogun is a lethal infection. So the problem cannot, although externally we may say this is milder and this is more severe. Externally, it is easy for us to impose a categorization there. But only that person experiencing that problem recognizes or realizes how difficult that problem is for them, right? Although lust under the sattva gun may seem to be a mild infection, for the person experiencing that infection, maybe it is an impossible thing for them to overcome because of avidya. So then what is the solution here? So Krishna uses the word slay in this 3.43, right? He's saying slay the insatiable enemy, lust. And same thing in 3.37, Krishna uses the metaphor of enemy. And he says that lust is not only self-destructive, it destroys everybody else around. So we can look at it in three ways and how you can address it. One is you can put regulation is what Krishna talks about, right? So for an alcoholic, a good way for them to regulate their addiction is to first put themselves at a distance. So for example, if their living quarters is right above a bar, then come on, what chances do they have of trying to have so much willpower that they can avoid that bar? So sometimes just putting a physical distance or fencing your desire in some way or fashion could be a good start, but that by itself is not going to be sufficient for you to overcome lust. So in the case of anger, we said a good fence would be for you to just walk away from the situation and don't respond and react to that situation in the heat of the moment. So take time to walk away from it and then come back and have a calmer conversation if that's feasible. So one is regulation. You put yourself, when I say distance, not just a physical distance. Distance yourself mentally and emotionally from that as well, until you've had time to introspect what that situation is and how do you need to address it. The other one is to redirect. What does redirect mean? So let us say you have gotten into some bad habits. Now, every one of us is not completely in the bad category. We have good in us as well, every one of us. So we need to figure out what is it that we can do that is going to make us feel the intersect of something that we're good at and that we enjoy, that brings us pleasure. I'm not talking about spirituality here anymore. To redirect your energies towards those activities that you are good at and that also brings you self-satisfaction or pleasure. So one way is fencing, the other way is using the tools and the capabilities or the talent that you already have to redirect your energies towards those activities. And the best solution for tackling lust is reconstruction, actually. This reconstruction is actually changing the impressions. So that when you search Google next time, you will get the result that you wanted and not what Google remembers. But to change those impressions, which is ultimately what Lord Krishna is talking about here, you have to develop new practices. You have to change your impressions. So if you're used to acting in a particular way, then you have to find other things to do. And the other things that Krishna is talking about is obviously on the spiritual platform. How can you practice meditation? How can you practice reading? How can you practice doing seva in the temple? How can you change your diet? By doing all of this, you will realize that you're better able to control the emotions and not be controlled by the emotions. Right? Fundamentally, the problem for us is our emotions that act as demons for us. I am sure none of us have these other addictions to things like cigarettes and alcohol. But our addictions are far more subtle. We come under the control of the gunas, and we come under the control. We succumb to our emotions very easily, whatever those emotions may be. So the question is, how can you transform yourself so that you enjoy who you are, you begin to love who you are, and others around you begin to love you as well. Right? So ultimately, it is a matter of changing or influencing your consciousness in a direction that pulls you away from what was your natural inclinations before. Because you didn't have the knowledge that this is, well, perhaps you knew it was self-destructive, but you really didn't know how to address it. So the first, any counselor will tell you, the first step in addressing a problem is to acknowledge that you have a problem. If you don't know you have a problem, how and why will you even bother addressing it? So for example, if I want to be recognized by my Gurudev, only I know that it is a desire. I've never expressed it to anybody. Unless I come across information that tells me that such a desire is impure, it is on the material platform, it has nothing to do with spirituality. Although I'm engaged in spiritual services, that kind of desire is going to destroy me. Because my mind is focused on something that is going to satisfy me and me alone, and not my intent is not to satisfy my Guru. So that is why Krishna uses the strong terminology, calling lust our eternal enemy, Nitya Vairina, he says. So if Krishna is saying this is your eternal enemy, then we need to be on guard all the time. We cannot ever, they say an addict is always an addict because his next drink is just a minute away. And it reminds me of one of my colleagues when I was working in the US, an American. He used to be a chain smoker. And he used to tell me, Lakshmi, it has been 10 years since I stopped smoking. And he remembers the date and the year that he had his last cigarette. And every year on the anniversary of his giving up cigarette, he would go and post or tell everybody. At that time, Facebook was not there. But these days I see him posting on Facebook. 20 years ago, this is the day that I stopped smoking. And he does this every year to remind himself that he's just another cigarette away from going back to that same habit. So that is why Krishna is saying this lust is an eternal enemy. We should never let down our guard, that we have conquered it. even after practicing chanting and other things, you may see that your anger will subside. You're at more peace with yourself. You don't get upset with little things that other people in the family may be doing. You don't get that easily annoyed anymore. You are able to manage office tensions better. You're even beginning to like who you are. But be on guard. That's what Krishna is saying. Be on guard. Your enemy is alert. You be on guard, because this lust, anger, and greed are the three gates to hell. They are your eternal enemies. If you're not on guard, they will overtake you in a millisecond. And you'll be back to your old habits. Right? So this is why Krishna keeps using the word enemy. Clearly indicating to us that these three things are not easy for us to handle. But we can do it through the proper knowledge and application. So first we have to acknowledge, and then we have to practice. So the best way to get rid of our anarthas, that is preventing us from progressing on the spiritual path, is to follow the instructions of the acharyas. It's as simple as that. We don't need to tie ourselves into knots trying to fix the problem. It is not complicated. It may seem complicated in the beginning, but if you have the proper understanding, then it is easier to overcome, because then Krishna is reciprocating with you. He is lifting you up, because you cannot do it on your own. Yeah, okay. Any questions? We'll stop here for the day. And
Recording stopped.
Mataji, Hare Krishna, I have a question. So I was listening to one of the Prabhujis in Delhi in YouTube. So what he was saying is to satisfy, to bring a smile on the Guru's face is a duty of a servant or a devotee. So my question is, for example, if you have taken this class and you are telling him that you have taken so many classes, that will bring smile to his face, right? So, I mean, what's wrong in it? Because if you're desiring to, bring a smile on the face, and your action are doing the same thing.
Can you repeat that again? I didn't understand.
Saying that, so one of the Prabhujis was quoting that it's our duty to satisfy our Guru. So
Yes.
when, for example, when you are taking the classes and
Yes.
you're receiving the good feedback, and you're telling to him that this is what I was doing and this is what I've received, surely he will be happy.
Yes.
So your purpose is achieved. So I'm saying, what is the harm of you're saying that?
No, there is a difference between reporting facts versus fishing for compliments. Fact is fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
X number of classes, X number of devotees, X number of registrations. And this is the feedback. But after reporting it, if your anticipation is the Guru Maharaj will pat you on the back and say, oh, how wonderful you are, what a great undertaking, he may. But if that is your desire and intent, then your service is a little bit colored, right?
I agree, Mataji, what you're saying, but when you are expecting that the Guru should be happy, so the next thought, it's like a natural in your mind that comes that he'll pat for sure. You're not desiring for it, but that will come eventually in your mind. So even that thought is not pious, or that should be there in your mind. Is it what you're asking?
The intent should not be, the intent is service, correct?
Correct.
Outcome is not what you are. Remember, Krishna keeps saying, be detached from the outcome. It's not in your hands.
Mhm.
Let's say you give the report, and if your guru says, why such poor, why only 100? Why not 500? How come you've not worked hard enough? You would not have anticipated that. Because you would have walked in thinking, I've satisfied my guru. Guru will never give you goals. He will never say, do 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. He will simply say, preach. But his measuring stick will be different than your measuring stick, correct?
Yes,
So
so
we
in
should
that,
go by Guru's measuring stick and not our measuring stick.
so Mataji, in that case, even the thought that you want to bring a smile to your guru, but the disappointment happens. So I mean, that is also not good then.
No, disappointment is good because that should spur you to work harder to please, to do what your guru has instructed, right?
Right. Got it, Mataji. I got the sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
So we have to be careful that even spirituality can be colored by these very subtle desires, right? Yeah.
Yes, Mataji, yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mataji, just one more. Come to the point of defect or disease. So, what was the answer there? Is it a defect or a disease?
It is both. If the defect is not addressed, it could become a disease. It begins as a defect.
Okay. Okay. All right, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Any other questions?
Mataji, I have a question, Mataji. We were just talking about desire, right? But sometimes we were discussing that we can have a spiritual desire, right? Like
yes,
chanting or reading books. Those kind of spiritual desires can be there. But at the same time, can't we not consider that our guru should appreciate as a spiritual desire? It cannot be claimed as a spiritual desire.
To please the guru is a spiritual desire. That is the mood you should be in.
Okay.
Definitely, because if you don't want to please the guru, how will you even act on the instructions, correct?
Yes, Mataji, but at the same time, you do all the activities, like as you said, preaching, chanting or reading, and as you said about the Gita Sandesh class, all that is activity that you are doing it to please your guru, right? At the same time, getting an appreciation cannot be claimed as a I don't know how to explain it. Cannot be claimed as a spiritual desire.
No. A spiritual desire is any desire to please the guru.
Okay.
The minute it is about me, that I want to be praised,
okay,
that is no longer a spiritual desire. If the desire is, I want to please my guru and I will accept whatever feedback he gives me, whether it is good, bad, or otherwise, then that is the proper mood. In the sense, it is your intent.
Okay.
You will do everything properly, you'll do everything nicely, you'll work very hard, you'll do everything faithfully. But you're hankering for recognition.
Okay.
That hankering for recognition is not the proper mood between a disciple and guru.
Guru. Okay.
If you're hankering for recognition, does that mean you have humility?
Yes.
You don't have, right?
Yes, we don't have.
When you're hankering for recognition, humility flies out of the window.
Correct. Yes, Mataji.
You cannot serve Guru unless you are humble.
Okay, got it.
Or you learn to be humble.
One more small doubt, Mataji. Can I ask?
Yes, yes, please.
So, if not on this spiritual path, if we take it to our, for example, our workplace, and we have our heads above us, okay, we might not want recognition from them, but there are times when we do extreme hard work, but yet we are spoken about. Oh, why was the work done like this? Why did it come out like this? So that's the time you start feeling dejected. Ki, oh, we've done so much and still, they are not satisfied. Then how do we deal with that feeling? So, it sometimes is demotivating.
I think in these situations, in the work realm, the best way to deal with it is to have a clear understanding of what the expectations are upfront. And sometimes the expectations also may keep changing depending on the circumstance. So if the expectations are constantly changing, that means the yardstick for measurement is also constantly changing. Then it is only fair from your perspective that you can speak to those who are giving you this feedback to have a clear understanding of what is the expectation. What are the check boxes you need to tick off for them to be satisfied with the work that you're doing, right? So that will require dialogue and communication and asking. And even if you get the feedback that this was not enough, then that presents you with the perfect opportunity to ask them, what is the expectation?
So, but sometimes, there is a gap. It's difficult for us to talk to them. It's difficult for us to face them and sit and communicate because they themselves are so busy. So somewhere deep down, the mind is always thinking, oh my God, I need to perfect myself. I need to get better.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
I think this question of Nandata Mataji is so conversation that I had yesterday with you.
Yes, in a different context though. There is something called a contractual responsibility. When it is a business to business transaction, there is a contract. There is a signed contract that clearly articulates what is the expectation between the service provider and the customer. Then you have to stick by the contract. That presumes that there is something in writing. But what if there is nothing in writing? That is as black and white as it could be, that you could say, if I do these things, my remuneration could be impacted. But in Namrata Mataji's case, this is not a written contract. There is an employment contract, but there is no written contract when it comes to short-term goals and whatever they call it, KPIs. This can keep changing. I know, because we work in the corporate world, we know how frequently the targets change. One day it is this number, next day it's another number, and we're going, how on earth? We are not magicians. How are we going to do this? But you're supposed to figure out how to do it, right? So that's part of the challenge of working in the corporate environment. But yes, wherever you can seek clarity, you should seek clarity. Wherever it is an impossible thing to ask for because it's just the nature of the kind of work environment that you're in, then I would say do your best and not worry too much about feedback. That doesn't mean you should give up, right?
Yes, yes.
But you also know what is your capacity, what is a realistic expectation and what is an unrealistic expectation. If you know that expectations are on the unrealistic realm, then you have to just move on. Move on meaning don't be unduly critiquing yourself for that. Because some things are, as they rightfully call it, just stretch goals. Sometimes you achieve it by fluke and sometimes you don't achieve it at all. Right.
So my concern was we keep, damaging ourselves sometimes, not knowing that, as you said, we can speak and get things done. But till then, all the time emotionally we are getting affected. So that's all. We take, hold of the Lord and keep ourselves more strong most of the times.
I think that is where Krishna's instruction, where he says, be detached.
Yeah.
There will be instances where you are praised. There will be instances where whatever you do is not enough, good enough. You have to take both in stride.
Thank you, Mataji.
And that comes with a very strong sense of who you are. If you have a very strong sense of yourself, then it is easy not to be distracted and disturbed by these things. And I think spirituality is one way to achieve that strong sense of self, So.
Yes, Mataji. And unknowingly, we are getting stronger, and I really feel good about it.
Yes, definitely. Because you are able to keep things in perspective. That's the ultimate objective. Everything falls into its appropriate box.
Yeah. So I'll just give you a tiny instance when we were supposed to attend a workshop, and there was a lot of work at home, and I somehow missed attending it in the first 15 minutes. So when I started attending it, by then they had taken attendance and they reflected my name in the absentee list. Whereas being the coordinator, it's my whole and soul duty to, attend it on time. So one of my colleagues called me and she said, how come, Namrata, why did the principal put your name, there? It doesn't look good. We are really upset about that. I said, it's fine. It was my mistake. I have skipped the first 15 minutes. Even if she's put my name, I'm going to take it positively and try and, not skip it the next time. That's all. So, I could feel them more affected than me. That's where I felt like, it's nice that I'm holding on to it more strongly.